Welcome to the Explainer. So, you know those apps we just open without even thinking about it? The ones that seem to pull us in like a magnet? Well, have you ever stopped to wonder why that happens? Today, we're going on a really fascinating journey into the psychology of digital engagement to uncover the hidden mechanisms that keep us scrolling, clicking, and learning. Okay, let's dive into this. Are our apps literally hacking our brains, or are they just brilliantly designed to give us exactly what our brains crave? Look, the hidden mechanics keeping us glued to our screens, they're undeniably powerful. But the real question we need to answer today is whether these tools are actually helping us grow or if they're simply hurting our ability to focus. To really understand this, we need to look at a pretty fascinating dichotomy. As you'll see, the exact same psychological triggers and design choices can be used for two incredibly different purposes. They can be used to build really positive, life-changing educational habits, or they can be used simply for harvesting our attention to sell ads. And honestly, the whole shebang starts with one fundamental behavioral concept. And that concept is variable ratio reinforcement. Scientifically speaking, this is a psychological technique that uses unpredictable rewards to capture and maintain human attention. Think of it like a slot machine, right? Or, pulling down to refresh your social media feed. You never know exactly what you're going to get or when you're going to get it. Tech firms use this form of classical conditioning to just keep us hooked, creating this loop where we are constantly seeking out that next little reward. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what happens when these exact techniques are used for good. I mean, the results are absolutely staggering. Look at this massive number here, 36%. By utilizing these very same psychological hooks, the language learning app Duolingo reported a 36% year-over-year increase in daily active users as of 2025. They literally took the mechanics of addiction and applied them directly to education. So how did they do it? Let's rapid fire through the 5 winning gamification tactics Duolingo uses. First up, mascots like Duo, the owl, that humanize the interface and make the notifications feel super personal. Second, badges. These fulfill our innate need for achievement and they drive referrals. Third is instant feedback, which puts you completely in control. Fourth, leaderboards, which tap into our natural human desire for social status and competition. And fifth, streaks, which absolutely turn sporadic interest into a non-negotiable daily ritual. Now, all of these tactics, they're specifically designed to help users escape what educators call the plateau of despair. It's that super frustrating period where you just feel like you aren't improving at all. Duolingo combats this so cleverly. Take their famous streak wager, for example. This leverages a psychological principle called loss aversion. Basically, the psychological pain of losing a 100-day streak vastly outweighs the effort of just sitting down and doing a quick 5-minute lesson. Plus, you know that satisfying little ping you hear when the AI-driven system confirms a correct answer? That triggers an instant dopamine release, which keeps learners intrinsically motivated to keep going. And the impact of these positive hooks is just profound. By transforming learning into a daily habit, Duolingo managed to slash their user churn rate from 47% in 2020 all the way down to a record 28% in major Western markets. They essentially proved that fun isn't just a distraction from learning, it is actually a requirement for it. But okay, here's where we have to pivot. What happens when these exact same engagement mechanics, the streaks, the pings, the unpredictable rewards, what happens when they're deployed not to teach us a new language, but simply to harvest our attention? When the only goal is just keeping your eyes glued to a screen for ad revenue, that intrinsic motivation vanishes. And that's when we start to veer into the dangerous territory of impaired control. Which brings us to the scientific reality of the dark side of digital engagement. Researchers call this problematic internet use, or PIU. Now, from a clinical perspective, PIU is defined by 3 main characteristics. First, impaired control over how much you use the internet. Second, an increased priority given to internet use, which often leads to neglecting other important parts of your life. And third, the continuation of that use despite clear negative consequences. Like staying up until 2 a.m. scrolling even though you know you have an early meeting. This is the precise point where our digital habits stop being helpful and actually become detrimental. To find definitive answers on this, the scientific community isn't messing around. A massive 2023 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Psychiatric Research meticulously filtered through thousands of records to select 24 high-quality studies. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the research, encompassing nearly 19,000 participants. They wanted to know definitively, what exactly is problematic internet use doing to our brains? Well, the data they uncovered is really eye-opening. What we're looking at here are R values, which basically measure the strength of a correlation.
and we see highly significant positive statistical links across the board. There's a 0.36 correlation for attention deficit, a 0.44 for hyperactivity, and a 0.41 for impulsivity. So put simply, the data shows that as problematic internet use increases, so do clinical symptoms of ADHD.
Let's move to and see how this builds across the broader scientific literature, because the evidence becomes pretty undeniable. Now, you don't need to be a statistician to read a forest plot like this. Every single one of those squares represents an individual independent study, and because they almost all fall to the right of that center line, it proves visually that this association between internet addiction scores and attention problems is incredibly robust across all sorts of different populations and methodologies.
But the researchers also uncovered a demographic nuance in the data that I found highly surprising. When they broke down the correlation between attention deficit and problematic internet use, they found that the association is actually significantly higher in adults than it is in children and adolescents. Now, we often worry immensely about screen time for kids, right? But this data suggests that adults who are, navigating complex lives and various stressors are actually displaying a much stronger link between their digital habits and attention deficits.
Further unpacking these demographic findings, the meta-analysis impartially noted some significant differences between the sexes as well. The researchers found that the effect sizes for both attention deficit and hyperactivity were significantly higher in male participants compared to female participants. This really indicates that while everyone is exposed to the exact same digital environments, the resulting psychological vulnerabilities can manifest quite differently depending on demographics.
So, the crucial point is this hypothesis from the researchers, and I'll just quote it directly. Attention deficit, hyperactivity, and impulsivity constitute a vulnerability towards PIU. It's essentially a two-way street. The instant gratification we experience using these apps can reinforce attentional biases, and if a person already struggles with impulsivity or attention, the very design of the internet makes them significantly more vulnerable to developing problematic habits. Those psychological triggers we discussed at the very beginning of this explainer, they perfectly map on to these psychiatric vulnerabilities.
Which brings us to a final, vital question that we really need to ask ourselves as we go about our day. Who really controls your attention? We've seen how the exact same psychological mechanisms can either teach us a new language or completely erode our focus. So the next time you feel that urge to just automatically open an app, maybe take a pause. Ask yourself if the mechanics inside are building you up or breaking your attention down. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.